2, 3. I hit it.
Okay.
Amazing. So we are live?
And confirmed that we are live.
We are live. Thank you very much, KT. Welcome. We have a special community office hours this time. The first time we're actually doing this. So this is going to be a secure community office hours, which means we're going to be talking about the secure product line. In particular, is going to be HashiCorp Vault and HashiCorp Boundary. To do that, I'm joined with my co-host, Rosemary. Rosemary, say hey.
Well, hello, everyone. I guess we're kicking off the Ignite deep dives this week. So I know Ignite is next week. We're a little early, but hey, you know, better late than never. Early than never, early than never.
Well, the early bird catches the worm is the saying that goes around. Also joined with us, anyone that's come to the previous community office hours for Boundary, you'll see very familiar faces here. We'll start off with Pete Payson. Pete, do you want to say a quick hello and introduce yourself to anyone that's new to this?
Sure, folks. For anybody that's new, I'm the product manager for Boundary. Yeah, happy to be here today.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us. And you know what? Just shout out to Pete because he joined us last minute, just filling in for a colleague of ours who's not feeling too great. So thank you so much for being here. And we also have the infamous Jeff Mitchell, the keeping it secure dad, I like to call him. If you'd like to say hey, just introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, I was gonna say I'm engineering lead for Boundary, but that's actually that's changing. No, I'm engineering lead for Boundary. That's the easiest thing to say.
Keeps things secure around here.
No, that's just that's what I should have led with, and this is just me being too like in the moment analytical, right? I can't let go if something might actually be like slightly off about what I'm saying. I'm like, but wait, I got to be accurate.
It's the engineer in us. Okay, cool. So
what do you expect from me, Rob?
Well, we expect secure things.
That's right.
I just want to cut to the scene. Secure all the things. With the, yeah.
So, like I said, we're gonna talk about Boundary and Vault. We're probably gonna kick it off with probably Boundary to start off with. So I think Rosemary, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah. So, you know, we've had some people ask questions about Azure specifically. So like, let's talk about Boundary and Azure, you know, either specific integrations, reference architectures. So we'll start with the first one, which is there a reference architecture for Boundary on Azure yet? I know we have one for Kubernetes, I think, and one for AWS. Jeff Melnick has kindly gone through it in previous office hours. Is there one for Azure?
Yeah, I can field that one. So actually, we just got a community contribution this week that we're really happy about from Ned Balavance around a Boundary reference architecture for Azure. So as you pointed out, reference architectures are kind of a key educational tool that we have for Boundary, and then also our other products to make sure that customers have or users have a way to run that you know, in a certified way that, or not necessarily a certified way, but in a way that we've kind of pre-validated and make sure work. So we've got a new contribution there that should be that's under review as we speak, but should be out for the public to consume this week.
Very cool. And out of curiosity, like what was the, you know, I imagine is this the first community contribution? It may or may not be for Boundary, but what was the contribution process like for, in this case, for a reference architecture?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of community contributed PRs. This is our first reference architecture that we've got contributed. Prior to this, we had one for AWS, Kubernetes, and then Docker. This was something that we had worked with. Jeff Malnick had actually worked with Ned, and that I think that I don't know the extent of Ned's involvement or the extent of Ned's kind of on-ramping for that. But I think in the future, this is also something that we're going to be looking to actually just, you know, publish kind of like a write-up on, so that we see the community if they're interested in, you know, creating other reference architectures for other platforms as well, so that they can get involved in that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I know Ned actually did a HashiTalks on the reference architecture. So we may not go deep dive into it right now just because Ned has content. For those who tuned into HashiTalks last week, we'll be cutting some of the videos. So there's some post-production involved. It just takes some time to post it. So once we get the link to Ned's talk to the Boundary reference architecture on Azure and how he went about it, I'll be sure to post it. But in the meantime, check out the HashiTalks. You can dig around for the schedule and you'll find Ned's talk. I guess like besides the reference architecture, one of the common things that we hear with Vault that I imagine is probably a similar question for Boundary is that how do you use Azure Active Directory with Boundary? Will there be a feature to support this?
You want to take that, Peter? Shy?
Go for it, Jeff. I keep, it's one of those things where I see you unmuting and I see myself unmuting.
Yeah, that's what I did. So
it's okay. We're not coordinated at all.
No, so we are working on OIDC integration for authentication for Boundary right now. Azure AD supports OIDC. So if you're a Vault user and you're using the OIDC authentication method with Azure AD, it'll be a very similar experience because we're actually in the process of unifying that code base between Boundary and Vault. So we're generating a shared library internally that that both are going to be using. So it should be pretty seamless. You would create an auth method of type OIDC and set various parameters, and then it would perform the redirect flow, and you'd use it sort of as you would expect.
It's funny actually. I had a friend and I was explaining that OIDC is coming, and that's probably going to be the first way that you can use something like Azure AD to be your identity provider for Boundary. And he didn't really understand how OIDC works. Like, what is the basic workflow of OIDC? So is that something you could just give us a high-level walkthrough on? Sure. Just in general, how it works.
Sure. Yeah. So so the general idea is that you have an identity provider. So that's something like Azure AD, or it might be Okta or Ping or Auth0 or any of these identity providers that you can get to kind of host your account information, all that kind of stuff. So you have an identity provider, and what happens is in that identity provider, you configure applications that are allowed to authenticate, and so it's provider specific, but they'll give you some kind of credential that says, okay, here's how you can identify this particular application. Here's some kind of identifier and a secret, and you give that information to the application, in this case Boundary. So when you want to authenticate, what happens is you'll go to Boundary first and say, I would like to authenticate, and Boundary basically says, cool, here's a URL to redirect to, and so it says here's the URL, and it generates that with information from its application identifiers, and also it can store state, and so it can generate information about the request that's coming in, and then that state will get round tripped back at the end of this flow, and then it can parse that and be like, okay, who was this? Now that I know kind of who this was, things like where were they trying to connect, and what scope was it in, and just other kind of useful information for Boundary. So Boundary generates this URL, and you click on the URL, or you get redirected in your browser, and that takes you to the IDP. And at the IDP, that's where you enter your username and password. You potentially go through MFA. If it's like Okta, they'll send a push or something. So you go through MFA, and then once that's all authenticated, then it redirects you back to Boundary. And in the redirection that goes back to Boundary, it provides the Boundary a token, which is basically and kind of an authentication token that is tied to that user. It provides a token, and it provides that state information that was originally created by Boundary to just round trip that back. From that token, how it works after that fact can be a little different depending on the provider. Sometimes you take that token and then you go back to the IDP and you swap it for what's called an OIDC JOT. Sometimes what comes back is in fact just an OIDC JOT. A JOT stands for JavaScript Web Token. And what it is it's a signed assertion. And so it's a 3-part token. And the first part has some information about the signature, stuff like that. The second part is the meat of it, which is a JSON blob. So it is JSON that's serialized and base64 encoded. And then there's some tail stuff at the end that's used as like a checksum. And so basically, from the information from the IDP, we can validate that that's a properly signed token using that information in the third part, which acts as a signature and kind of allows you to verify the contents. So we can validate the signature. And then if we validate the signature, we know that the JSON information that was contained in that token was in fact signed by the IDP. So we can trust it. And that's really what it comes down to. And so what OIDC is really all about is it's about allowing the user to authenticate against some IDP, but then allowing the application to be able to trust that the information that came back was in fact provided by the IDP. So that's kind of that two-phase aspect of it is, the user has to be told to authenticate, but then we have to validate that signature that comes back. The nice thing is once we validate that, it gives us all sorts of useful information. So there are common what are called claims, which are basically the keys that are in that JSON. You get ones like what's the user information, what's the application it's intended for, so you can verify that it's not a token that was produced for something else. You get information possibly about like the email address. There can be a lot of like custom stuff in there as well. And where Boundary will eventually go, although I don't think it's going to appear in sort of the MVP for the OIDC auth method, is being able to use that information to automatically add the user to various groups. So you can say, if the user has this piece of information in there, or if this particular claim matches this value, then add them to a member of a group. And so you can have those groups that are given permissions within Boundary, and as people authenticate, they're automatically updated in terms of which groups they're a part of. So hopefully that was a parsable overview of how it all works.
I'll tell you what, I thought I understood it, but just listening to you now, things are a lot clearer. So definitely thank you
great.
for that. Well, one of the things Boundary has done really well is this ability to configure and do certain things via the CLI, but you can do the same things using Terraform or just interact directly with the API. In terms of the vision for OIDC, is the plan to hopefully have Terraform support for this configuration to set this up?
So I don't know about Terraform performing the OIDC flow as a logon mechanism.
No, sorry, I meant as a configuring.
Oh, to configure it, absolutely. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're actually much of what we are doing. We've put a lot of investment as we built Boundary into auto generation, and so we start out with protobuf definitions of structs and of our services, and then that turns into Open API output. It turns into our Go API, our Go SDK. And Terraform we're not auto-generating, but basically because everything is sort of comes from that single source of truth about like what the API looks like, it's very easy for us to add Terraform bits into it. And we may actually get to a point where we auto-generate much of the Terraform provider so that as we add these things, we can do that. One thing that I've been working on lately that's actually in PR right now is that much of the CLI is actually going to be auto-generated as well. And so that way we can make changes to it or enhance it very easily with only the bits that are different for the different like auth methods or host catalogs or things like that. Only those parts are actually kind of different code, whereas everything else is sort of auto-generated. So that's going to allow us to both move faster and sort of make sure that those things keep up to date with the API capabilities, but it also just makes sure that that as we generate new features, it's really super easy to make sure that they get added to Terraform and added to the CLI and so on. We're also, one thing I'll mention as well is Terraform is not. When we first came out with Boundary, Terraform was released with Boundary for the first couple of releases, but we've actually removing Terraform, the Terraform module to its own release cadence. And that's partly because, the API itself doesn't really change. And so Terraform, might be like, okay, now this version of the Terraform module adds support for, for this OIDC provider, and it might require some new version of Boundary if you want to make use of that particular module within the Terraform provider. But otherwise, the past stuff just works fine. And so you don't need to update the Terraform provider just because Boundary got updated. So we're trying to make sure that that's something that you can kind of update on your own time and not have to keep those in lockstep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like a microservice way of looking at it. Just try to decouple the two different parts, even though they interact really well with each other. I dig that.
I don't know if you know this, but actually Boundary, the way it's constructed, it's actually running Kubernetes internally. And it's actually a collection of about 400 different modules. It's all wrapped up in a single binary, but in memory, it actually goes into a microservice deployment. It's not true. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I was just about to give them the URL to the boundary for IOPS. It's all on the internal workflows.
Why do we need a Kubernetes reference architecture if Boundary is running Kubernetes?
No, I'm just kidding.
Do you know what it is? You need to run a scheduler on top of your scheduler. That's real scheduling.
Well, that's what Nomad is actually on Kubernetes as well. It's actually a scheduler on top of a scheduler that can then run a scheduler.
Hey, Kelsey Hadtar actually gave a talk at one of the previous HashiCorps where he did that, where he ran Kubernetes and Nomad together, and it was an insane talk. It's on YouTube. Definitely go check it out. I'll try and get a link.
I've seen it. Yeah, Kelsey's given a lot of talks at HashiCorp. They're always good. He's a good speaker.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So shifting gears a little bit. So I know Rosemary had a question around sessions on Windows machines, but before we kind of get to that, I kind of wanted to just head over to Pete and talk a little bit about the desktop client, right? So we have, it's in alpha at the moment, a desktop client for Boundary, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. So last week we released a desktop client on Mac OS in alpha. So basically what that does is it gives a GUI interface for end users of Boundary to be able to view the targets that they have access to and connect to those in a nice, clean, graphical user interface versus the CLI where sessions previously had been started by users. So right now, this is kind of like a MVP version where you can see your targets under management, view any active sessions that you create through Boundary. But we have pretty big aspirations for this tool. Like down the road, we'll be looking at starting actual sessions, for particular connect subcommands through the UI itself. Being able to connect over your preferred application. Let's say an example of that would be like, I want to connect to some, I don't know, like SQL database or something like that, rather than starting the connection over the, desktop client and then connecting over my application of choice, just being able to integrate that into the app itself so that the app goes and connects over my preferred app to connect to SQL. Let's say like I use SQL Management Studio or something like that. And configuring those integrations into the tool is also something that we're really, really excited about, as well as a whole set of preferences and user-specific customizations for the tool. So right now, like I said, that's released in alpha. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll be transitioning that to a beta period, and then hoping by the end of this month or early next, the GA of the desktop client. So it's something we're all really excited for. And then the other thing that I should mention is while it is in initial release on Mac OS right now, we will have a quick follow-on for Windows support for the tool.
That's amazing. What I'll try and do is I'll try and get some links and post it in the chat. So if anyone wants to check out the alpha and give us some feedback or any pointers, then that'll be absolutely great.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, welcome feedback on that. From the community.
Definitely. So moving over to Rosemary, I think you had a question about sessions on Windows machines. So I will not steal your thunder.
No, I won't. It's not really even thunder. Right now you can, in Boundary, you'll be able to see sessions right through SSH, different, whatever. There's a whole list of them. Can you do this for Windows? Is it possible to do this, with an RDP session? Are there
Sure.
plans for this?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say up front, because I have to reiterate this a lot, is that right now the only target type is straight up TCP. And so any higher level protocol that runs over TCP can be proxied through Boundary. Boundary Connect SSH, Boundary Connect RDP, Boundary Connect Postgres, those are all just helpers that are designed to make it easier to launch that type of session. But they're actually using, like right now, they're all using TCP under the hood. Now, if we have other target types that are more kind of native to those formats, then they'll be adapted to be able to use that as well. But that's a really important thing, because a lot of people assume that like I can't, if I don't see a boundary connect subcommands for that specific protocol, that I can't use it. But in fact, the normal kind of stock protocol is in fact whatever the target type is, in this case TCP. So there is a boundary connect RDP subcommand right now, which is what that does is it'll start a TCP session, and then it will launch MSTSC, or on Mac, I believe it launches. I'd have to look. I'm running on a Windows and WSL machine now, so I don't remember offhand. But I know that on Mac it uses Open Command and it launches, I believe, the official client as well. But basically, you can. So that is just a helper. That's a way to make it easy, so you can say boundary connect, RDP, and have us sort of launch it with the address pointed to the right location, right? So you don't have to fill in like, oh, go to this localhost address and this localhost port. We just sort of fill it in for you, and it's ready to go. So that does exist right now. But again, if you're using some kind of custom access method for Windows machines, or even if you want to SSH into a Windows machine, because modern Windows machines support an SSH server if you install it, then you can certainly use, in that case, Boundary Connect SSH, or you can just use Boundary Connect as just a bare command, and then you'll get a listening port and address, and you can simply point your client of choice at that listening port. The other thing I'll mention is that we support styles for these commands. So so Boundary Connect RDP defaults using MSTSC. I think that and the one on Mac are the only one that are currently recognized right now, but we can definitely support. There's a flag, and I think it's called style, but the default is MSTSC. But if people have other clients that they'd like to use, like X-Free RDP, let's say, then that's a really easy kind of community contribution to make. We've separated out the logic for those styles, so it's really easy to add those bits kind of independently. It's all in one file, and so that's really easy community contribution. If you have clients that you prefer to use, you can help us add styles for other clients, and then you can turn it into Boundary Connect RDP style, free RDP, and then have it launch that for you automatically instead. So it's but again, going back a second, like any TCP protocol can really be handled by Boundary at this point. If there's something specific around, I don't know if there's any specific thing about Windows sessions that they're looking for, but it's certainly doable. In fact, at our launch video, I actually demoed RDPing from one machine into the other. So definitely possible.
Awesome. So I guess by extension, then, could I do Microsoft SQL Server in this? I mean, maybe I would have to do some. It does run on TCP, so in theory, I could do this in any target. Yeah.
So SQL Server. One thing that I don't know is some various database protocols behave differently. So Postgres, for instance, if you are generating a target. We actually made a change because this was sort of confusing kind of new users. We made a change where the default, if you start in dev mode, the default now for that target is to have an unlimited number of connections in a session, because many protocols require multiple connections to be made. Postgres is one of them, for instance. So it as far as I can tell, the first connection is to get the server capabilities, like how can I authenticate, and then the second connection establishes the session. So SQL Server should be supported. What I don't know is, does it use multiple ports? Does it use multiple sessions? So you might have to have multiple targets set up if you use multiple ports. You might have to, make sure that you have enough connections per session allowed if you use multiple connections. We are actually thinking about, I don't think it's on the roadmap right now. We are thinking about supporting kind of a multi-port target. So you could say, hey, when I create a session, I want it to open 5 different ports, right? And so it can open 5 different ports. And so that way, if you have an application that uses lots of different ports, you could say, okay, I want to open a port on these things that are kind of the well-known port numbers, and then I can point my client locally and have it just work. So that's something that we're considering as well for those types of applications. Again, I don't know if SQL Server is one of them, but as long as you use TCP, it should be possible right now.
Well, if anybody tries it in the community, let us know if it works or not. Maybe I'll go try it. All right, so I think this is a good transition question between Boundary and Vault. Unfortunately, we didn't have any Vault engineers who were able to make it today. So we're actually going to do with every permutation of Vault that you can use with Azure that Rob wrote. But I guess this is a pretty common question for both Boundary and Vault, which is, when will there be LDAP support, or why prioritize OIDC support over LDAP support?
So Vault supports LDAP. It has for a long time. Boundary doesn't. So I think, I mean, Pete, you could talk about
Doesn't yet.
Doesn't yet. So yeah. Let me unpack that for a moment. There are OIDC is becoming increasingly popular in enterprises, but also in the open source world. There are lots of solutions where you can run your own identity server that supports OIDC. It's a very widely adopted standard. And one thing that's actually nice about it, if you've dealt with LDAP, you probably know that LDAP ain't LDAP. No LDAP server is like another. No LDAP schema of the same type of server is like another. It's a pain in the butt. And so, when we're thinking, okay, how can we get, in kind of our next auth method, what's the most bang for the buck we can get in terms of we only have time to work on one right now. OIDC was sort of the clear choice because it's, provides a lot of modern security. You get a lot of standardized claims that you can work with. So things like a unique sort of user identifier is baked in, and it's not like, oh, well, maybe it's SN on this one and it's UID on that one, and it's there's a lot of that kind of stuff you don't have to deal with. The other thing that is important is that there are bridges out there between OIDC and other types of systems. And so Vault is becoming one of those. Vault actually will allow you to get OIDC tokens out of Vault right now after you've authenticated through other means, but they are working on adding that redirect flow so that you can actually use Vault and any of its backends, which include LDAP. You can actually use Vault as an OIDC authenticator with Boundary. So that is something that is being worked on by the Vault team. And that would also be good for our other products as well, because Console Enterprise, I think, supports OIDC. I think Nomad Enterprise might, but basically, or is going to. And so then, if you're using Vault, which many of our customers are, then anything that you can authenticate to with Vault now just becomes a way to get OIDC working with anything else. That said, if you're not a Vault user, if you don't want to run Vault or don't want to wait for Vault, there are other solutions out there. Dex is one that's popular. Dex is a bridge that has that basically acts as an OIDC bridge to other types of systems in a similar way to the capability that Vault is gaining. So from that perspective as well, we could sort of kind of duplicate the Vault functionality in a native LDAP client. On the other hand, because so many of our users are already using Vault, and because OIDC is supported, in many other contexts, then saying, hey, you could use Dex or Vault and get support for LDAP or anything else, and then just use that to authenticate to Boundary was a really compelling story for us. So, I think I don't know if Pete was saying LDAP is going to come at some point, or if he's saying the yet because of the Vault work going on. But that's certainly one possibility there.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that well. I think that if you think about it from the perspective of Azure end user or Microsoft house end user, you probably need to support Azure AD, which we will through OIDC authentication. And then for Active Directory on premises, we'll need to support that LDAP auth method. As Jeff said, adding support through one of these OIDC bridges, whether it's Vault, Dex, or otherwise, is an avenue that we'll kind of first look at for that. But then long term, we do recognize that there's value to have a native support for each major auth protocol, even outside of any of these authentication bridges. So native LDAP support within Boundary is something that we'll look at long term. It's just that's going to take, that's just a question of priority versus all the other features that we want to get to within Boundary. So we kind of see this OIDC bridge method as an exciting opportunity for something that we can get at faster, while we kind of take a little bit longer on that native support as we prioritize that versus other features.
There are also some good reasons why. I mean, I know that I'm well aware of LDAP being entrenched at many places and kind of the difficulty of moving off of that. But, I think that from a kind of a forward-looking perspective, we do see a lot of our customers trying to get off of LDAP for various reasons. I mean, some of them are kind of the challenge of dealing with something that is often ends up being kind of custom to your install, but also things like OIDC is gaining support. There's a standard that I think just got ratified that's gaining support for the ability to actually reach back to applications and log off users if they are disabled or if they are removed, something that LDAP doesn't do. And there's and kind of the idea around single sign-on, where LDAP is really sign-on everywhere, as opposed to single sign-on, set a cookie, be able to use that, or just kind of redirect, but you've already logged in. There's just a lot of kind of more kind of modern security principles that are baked into OIDC, and so we do also see, I think probably, not wanting to speak for Pete here, probably a lot of it will come down to sort of what is the momentum we see from our users around what they're asking for. But there is some momentum we see with our users of people trying to get off of LDAP as kind of a security enhancement step, and just to make their life easier. And so that's I think that's something that is also, if you're in an LDAP world, it's worth sort of thinking about, is like, should I actually be looking at some of the protocol, even though it's a lot of pain? And I know it's a lot of pain. I've been there.
Yeah, I call it the elephant in the GitHub issues. It's like,
love it.
Yeah, because it's there. People ask, and we know. I think it's a very good perspective to have. Right?
We actually, there's a weird flip side that most people won't realize, which is we actually had. There were cases in Vault before OIDC support where there were people that were running. Some variant of Active Directory, some configuration of Active Directory, where they weren't actually they didn't have the LDAP services enabled, and they were basically saying to us, like, you're forcing us to start LDAP services and secure them and like do these other things, when in fact, like, we've worked hard to get away from that. So there are actually cases where people have gotten mad at us before we supported OIDC for not supporting it when we already supported LDAP. So, it's a different situation for everybody. It's just how it is.
Awesome. Pete, we're transitioning a bit to Vault stuff, so you're welcome to drop. I know we had you jump on last minute, but you're welcome to stay on. We actually had a question from the chat specifically about Vault, and they're curious to know how you use Azure DevOps, right? From a security perspective, what are the ways that you would secure it? They're hoping to hear something about running Terraform workflows, but the Terraform community office hours for Ignite is next week on March 2nd. So the Terraform experts will be able to help you a little bit more about Terraform plus Azure DevOps. But can anyone talk about what are some of the security, from a security perspective, what you need to be doing for Azure DevOps specifically?
I can't say I've used it in enough depth to really tackle that and give any advice there. There's probably more experienced people like Ned, for example, who did the boundary reference architecture, who would know a lot more about that. Sorry, Ned, for throwing you in it, but we love you here. So I can't really say much on that. Talking about the Terraform workflows from a security perspective, what I would say is, as you're writing infrastructure as code, you're going to come into situations where you're going to have to handle secrets, right? Maybe you are configuring a database or something like that in Azure, and you need to give it like a master password and a master user or something like that. So sorry, there's banging going on here. I have my roof going on, so I do apologize. But what we have in Terraform is we have the Vault Terraform provider, which allows you to use Vault as the secrets manager in the back end, and that can inject secrets into your Terraform runs for you. So that's quite a common approach. I mean, even if you're not using Vault and you want to use something like Azure Key Vault, for example, and just store some static secrets in there because you're all in with Microsoft Azure. Again, the Azure provider for Terraform does support that as a data source, so you should be able to just pull that right in. So the idea is when it comes to running your Terraform is try to not hard code your secrets into your Terraform codes. Try to use a security platform like Vault, for example, to manage that for you. And you can always reference it as a data source. And the other good thing is in terms of Terraform, I don't want to steal their thunder, but I'm a big Terraform fan. They've made huge strides in recent releases to make things more secure. So I know now you have the ability to mark certain outputs as sensitive, which means that you can define certain things, but it will never spit it out to the CLI as plain text because it recognizes it's sensitive data. We also have things where you can read environment variables as Terraform variables. So that kind of enables a few different workflows in terms of security. Like I say, I'll let the Terraform folks speak more about that, but there are definitely some good workflows in there that are going to help you secure your Terraform workflows a bit more.
And as a side note, if you're doing any kind of framework that supports pipelines, right, you always have the option of using self-hosted agents versus the agents that they provide for you. And if you are using Vault, if you're planning to inject Vault secrets, right, so you're picking up the secrets from Vault, like in the case of Terraform, you're planning to pick up the credentials like Azure Service Principals from Vault and injecting them into your pipeline for use in Terraform, you can use the Vault auth methods to allow those self-hosted agents to authenticate to Vault first. And that basically, you don't have to do any of the other authentication sequences like app role, any of the other stuff. But if you're using runners that are not your own, like you're using the Azure DevOps out of the box Microsoft runners, you may have to do you have to add some additional stages to your pipelines to actually authenticate to Vault and retrieve the credentials and then eventually eject it into Terraform pipelines. So those are two considerations as well. And something for a question asker, depending on your environment, you may change or you may need to experiment with. But those are for pipelines specifically. It doesn't matter if you're using Azure DevOps or any of the other any pipeline tools. The pattern generally involves either authenticating to Vault, using your own agent, or having to build a pipeline stage by which you would have someone else's agent authenticate to Vault for you and retrieve the credentials and inject them. All right, so let's see if we have other questions. By the way, if anybody else has additional questions on Vault or Boundary, please post in the chat. We'll ask them as we go along. And I appreciate those who have been asking questions so far. But since we've now officially transitioned to Vault, Rob and Jeff to a certain degree, what are all the ways in which you could use Vault with Azure? I know this could be a really lengthy discussion, but just a very quick recap of what are the different ways that I could use Azure with Vault, either from auth methods or secrets engines or you name it, and I probably didn't think about it.
So I'll probably take a stab at this. So I'll probably prefix this by saying that I was quite reluctant at the time to call it this, but it was my best practice guide for running Vault in Azure. And this is maybe around 18 months ago. So I'll post the link in the chat. But it details some of the ways that you can use Vault natively in Azure, kind of making the most of some of the features that Azure gives you. So if we just kind of look at some of them from a, so I think the guide's already been posted in the chat, amazing. So looking at things like the sealing mechanism of Vault. So anyone that's used Vault before knows that by default, when you first start up Vault, it comes in a sealed state. And then you need a quorum of unsealed keys to make the Vault usable, essentially, which is really good from a security perspective, but can present a challenge when it comes to the maintainability of managing a Vault cluster. So one of the features that the good developers, and I think Jeff Mitchell might be one of the people behind it, came up with is a feature called Auto Unseal, by which you can use a Cloud KMS in this example. So we'll use Azure Key Vault to generate some encryption keys, and it will use that to encrypt all the data that Vault is processing and then store it in the storage backend. So now what happens is all you need to do is feed Vault the details of that key vault where the encryption key is stored, and every time Vault comes up, it will reach out to there and it will decrypt the data. And you don't have this process of having to get all the different unsealed keys. So if you had, for example, 3 unsealed key holders, you'd have to wake 3 people up in the middle of the night if you had a server restart. And auto unseal kind of alleviates that kind of operational overhead. And the fact that there's native support there for Azure Key Vault is something that's, for me, quite harmonious there. So that's just one thing. There are quite a few other things as well. And Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that before I kind of move on to something else. So.
Yeah, I think, so the auto unseal is one. Azure Active Directory for authentication is another. There's something that I know is coming down the pipeline, but I honestly don't know if it's been announced yet or if it's related to KMS stuff. So I will say that there is something in progress, but I'm not sure if it's announced yet. So I'm gonna stop.
Always wise.
This is one of those, like, I have to check the changelog, and if it's not there and I can't find it announced elsewhere, then I probably won't talk about it because it's not my place to do so. But all I'll say is it involves Azure KMS, and so if you if people know of something else that is related to that that's already been announced, fine, that's probably it, and otherwise something to look forward to.
So the other thing with Azure Key Vault is, I think by default, it's kind of available on a public internet. So if you set up a Key Vault and maybe you generate some TLS certificates or you store something static inside there, as long as you have permissions to it, you can get to it from the internet. So the way to get around that is that there's something called, what do they call it again? I think it's called Azure Service Endpoints. And basically what that does, it kind of removes that default allow via the internet access, and you can now use the identity of your virtual networks in Azure to set up a rule base as to who or what can access that Key Vault. So in terms of access control, you can basically narrow things down to quite a granular method, which is, I'd say, the recommended way of doing it in my personal opinion. So definitely look into some of these native features of Azure that you can use in harmony with Vault. I'm going to go on mute for a second if anyone else wants to say anything, because the banging's getting really loud.
Oh, yes. So someone did point out that if you're referring to the key management secrets engine, it is in tech preview and it is available for the Azure Key Vault.
That is what I was referring to. So yes. Great. Yes.
Yes, it is in tech preview. I'll drop a link to the guide, to the blog announcement with it. So thank you.
I've been steeped pretty long in Boundary Land, and so I'm behind on the Vault side of things.
That's all right. So there we are. It is there. And there's also for those who are curious.
Should I just explain what that's all about for those that don't know?
Yeah, why not?
so the idea there is that it's handling lifecycle of keys in Azure, and there are a number of reasons that people might want to do this through Vault. But one of the reasons is if you want to use customer master keys, where you want to basically have keys that are provided by the customer that are then used as like encryption keys within Azure. And the reason people want to do that, you might say like, oh, well, if I give the key to Azure and Azure's using it for encryption operations and so on, then like, why does it matter? They have my key anyways. The reason it matters in some cases is that you may have restrictions on like entropy sources for how the keys were generated. You may have escrowing, you may have needs to escrow keys. Where normally you can't just export the key out of Azure Key Vault, I don't think, but you might have a policy that requires you to always be able to have that root encryption key. And so this is a way where you can say, okay, I want to make use of Azure Key Vault, but I need something that can, like, I need to generate the key, and then I need that key to sort of be managed for me. And so Vault is providing a way to basically allow you to within Vault, I think you can generate new versions of the keys, although I'm not 100% sure on that, but or if you just give Vault new versions of it, but it basically allows you to manage the lifecycle of keys that are in Azure Key Vault through Vault API. So that's what that's all about.
Awesome. And I think the other thing that was announced as part of this was auto join, which is for at least for integrated storage, right? So for integrated storage, there's auto join. I don't know if it I think it supports Azure as a provider as well. So for those who are interested, please check out the information on that. I know we've had a couple of office hours on auto join, Raft, integrated storage. Check out some of the previous links. For those who are curious, there's also that integration point with Azure as well.
It's using the Go Discover library under the hood. So I think a lot of our products are using that if it supports Cloud Auto Join. So yeah, definitely check that out on YouTube.
All right. So what's next, Rob?
Oh, we have loads. So we could talk about let's talk about load balancing. So this was a bit of a challenge for me when I was trying to figure out how to load balance traffic to my Vault cluster on Azure. Now they've got a few different mechanisms for load balancing there. And I can't remember what the default one's called. I think they call it a network load balancer. I stand to be corrected there. But the issue I had with that is it load balances in a round robin kind of fashion, which is fine, but it doesn't support HTTPS calls into Vault that way. So, you go through encrypting your Vault cluster, you have TLS set up everywhere, you have all your gossip protocols are all encrypted, everything's nice and secure. But then when you get to the load balancer, if TLS is terminated there, it's kind of like a lot of hard work for nothing. So what I wanted was a load balancer that supports TLS basically all the way. And one of the things that Azure does have, aside from their network load balancer, is their application gateway, which is a lot more sophisticated than their network load balancer. Definitely have a look into that. I'll see if I can find some links and post some Microsoft docs to that.
Does the network load balancer have to terminate TLS?
Sorry?
Does the network load balancer have to terminate TLS?
The network load balancer, this is back then, by the way. So I'm not sure if they've made any improvements since then. But back then, there was just no way to do any TLS on the network load balancer. It was very simple. You have a pool of nodes and.
Okay. You want? I see. I misunderstood something. You want to do TLS termination on the load balancer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Because when you're talking about the clustering and all that, this is actually something that people have run into occasionally. Is they're trying to run the clustering side of things through a load balancer that is terminating TLS, and you cannot do that. And so people are like, oh, I set up Vault with an application load balancer on AWS, which is I think, more the application gateway sort of scenario, and clustering is just not working. It's like, don't do it. Stop terminating. Like we carefully manage our TLS stack. Stop trying to mess with it. Okay, so you wanted to terminate it. I misunderstood because you've been talking about the auto join and clustering and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely check that out because you can. The other thing is it's got really granular health checks in there as well. You can do things like, for example, with basic load balancers, it's just going to round robin between the nodes. But sometimes you just want to direct all the traffic to the leader in the cluster. So just through being able to make certain status calls to the Vault API, you can figure out what the leader is and direct all the traffic there. There are so many different things. It's so powerful. I actually tried to make a Terraform module on this, but there were so many different variations of things that people in the organization wanted to do back then that I just thought, you know what? If you need to use application gateway, just go ahead and configure it the way that you need to do it because it's, like I say, it's very powerful. So I'll try and get some links. It might take me a while to dig that up, but I'll post that in the chat when I do. But that's definitely the way to go in my experience. And I had a lot of pain there, so I have scars. And some of the other things, the more basic things that a lot of people overlooked when I was doing some of this work back then is just the basic makeup of a VM on Azure. So if you're going to host your Vault clusters on Azure on VMs, in general, the VMs are made up of a combination of network interface cards, storage disks, and the actual VM itself. So you normally have to configure those three pieces. If we talk about the disks, you have the ability to encrypt those disks within Azure. So when we talk about security, we're trying to just add layers of mitigation to the risks of something bad happening. So I think if you're going to be hosting Vault on Azure, you're going to be building VMs. Using Azure Key Vault is what they're using under the hood to do the disk encryption. Using a combination of Azure Key Vault and encrypted disks, that is definitely the way to go to build your Vault machines. And then on top of that as well, there's automated backups as well. I think they call it Azure Virtual Machine Backups. And this also has support for your encrypted disks as well. So you definitely should turn these things on. I've never really had a scenario where you've had to like invoke disaster scenarios where you're recovering these things, but it's always nice to know that you have that protection there. And these things don't take much to build. It's already built into Azure. So it's just about looking at the features of the cloud and just deciding which of them works really well for your use case. And everyone's disaster recovery scenarios are kind of different. The requirements are different. But I imagine that backups is something that a lot of compliance officers would want to see a big tick next to. So, using that VM backup option just makes your life easier. You don't have to go elsewhere. And then just even things like Azure supports availability zones. So when you're designing your Azure clusters, just spreading them out across different availability zones, it kind of just reduces the risk of sort of outages within a data center, for example. So I think the way it works is you'll be in a specific region. I can't remember what the terminology is in Azure. And within that region, they'll have multiple data centers. So if you're in, say, I can't remember what the regions are called, but I'll just say London, for example, they'll have data center A in London, data center B, and data center C. So just spreading your workloads across that just kind of gives you a bit more redundancy. And like I say, these things are all just natively built into Azure. So just work in harmony with it. You don't need to sort of hack things and figure things out for yourself if Azure has done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So check out my paper and just go through some of the suggestions in there and just see if they apply to what you have going on in your deployment.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. I have all of the links posted in chat, but I'm also going to follow up with the links in Discuss as well. So I also post the link to the forum for those who are not able to follow along in the chat. Check out the Discuss forum. We'll have some of the links for both Boundary and Vault as a post there. So first of all, big thank you to Jeff and Pete for being here. And thank you, Pete, for joining last minute. And taking on the Boundary questions, and Jeff for doubling up a little bit on the Vault questions as well. It's been great. Always a pleasure to have both of you on. We have a couple more deep dives for this week and next week. So we have up next Nomad Microsoft Ignite deep dive tomorrow, and we have deep dive for console on Thursday. Then we have Microsoft Ignite deep dive for Terraform on March 2nd. So for those who are curious to learn more or have specific questions about the tools, feel free to ask. With that, I'm going to post our community office hour schedule. But did anybody, Rob, did you have anything else that I missed in our outro or our wrap up for today?
I just want to just give a shout out to Katie, who's been doing the chat moderation, and Alexandra, who's been helping us sort of get organized and get these sessions up and running. There's a lot of hard work that goes into these live streams. I know you see us laughing and joking and having fun, but in all seriousness, there's a lot of people behind the scenes that help make this happen. So just want to kind of just put the big ups out there for them.
Awesome. And with that,
go ahead. I take it seriously, Rob. Some of us are professionals that take pride in our work, and some of us just joke around. Yeah, that's...
The other one that I was going to just say is a thank you, just to reiterate, is a big thanks to Ned Bell Events around the contribution for the Boundary reference architecture, just to run Boundary on Azure infrastructure. I think it's like D2 VMs for the controllers and workers, and Azure Key Vault as Boundary's KMS. So just another big thanks to Ned for the help on that.
Yeah, definitely follow
100%.
Ned. Ned has some great content. He's on nedinthecloud.com. So shout out. I'll send
Ooh, I
this
like
to
that.
him and a shout it out. All right. With that, I am going to stop the live stream. Tune in for the next ones. We appreciate you tuning into this secure live stream today. And if you have